Welcome to the next key point in Hans Zimmer's artist feature, and today we'll be looking at depth in progression. Now, this one's quite easy to explain, and what it is essentially the progression that he uses from the start of a piece to the end of the piece, or halfway through the piece. It doesn't really matter how long, it's having progression and not starting straight away with all your instruments going all at once. Now, obviously, it depends on the context of the track and what you're trying to do, because some of his tracks do start off with a loud drum kit or something like that. Some things from Batman, I believe, do that, and that's completely fine. But a lot of his tracks start off with simple strings, very small amounts of violin or viola or something like that, and slowly build in with the cellos and the basses coming in the deeper end and adding not only progression to the piece, but the depth in the piece with the dynamic range, which then adds to the whole progression. So that is why it's called depth in progression. It's a better example of it in the article. But basically, for my track, what I did was took the essences really from Solomon, the first track that I listened to. I've got the harmonics starting, then comes in the string section with some violins. I think the cellos are playing as well, but the bass doesn't. Then it becomes a triad, a chord, rather than just two notes in the chord. And then the lower octave comes in with the left hand, so the bass notes of the basses. And a lot of depth is created with that, with the harmonics. Then the violin melody that accompanies the chords. If you'd seen my previous video, you can understand that the melody isn't trying to be a theme or trying to stand out. It's trying to accompany the chords and not stand out from the chords. And then after that, I have brass come in. So it's a lot of progression, and it's really to do with just adding more instruments, a few more notes within chords that you're doing, or, having melody and then having something else play the melody alongside the initial melody. I have a violin playing the melody initially, and then I have a viola come in and play the melody for the second part with the violin. So it's once again just adding to what I already have alongside some brass doing the chords. Now I'll play this example. I'll play little bits of it because it starts off from the very beginning of the track and ends with a structural change that is 2 minutes later. And you can hear what the structural change does to the sound with the different instruments in the previous videos. So this is how it starts, and then I'll move it on to a little bit further in the section and then a little bit further to hear how the progression is progressing. As you can hear, I've already added 3 notes in there. I could have just stayed with one note and then gone to another note, but with that progression, I can add one note, one note, one note to make 3 notes of that chord, and all of a sudden it's feeling a little bit bigger. And then just after that, I add in actual strings with sort of normal articulations rather than the harmonics with the violin. So there you're already hearing the melody, the harmonics playing a chord, and you've also got the strings with basses, cellos, and violins all playing sustained notes. Then we have the viola come in. So the viola comes in with a deeper tone, once again adding that depth in the progression. And then to finish it off, we have a slight change in the melody, but we also bring in the brass. So that took 1 minute and 48 seconds to go from one instrument to having what I would class as a semi-full orchestra. The reason why it takes so long is not only just because of the tempo, but you don't want to rush the progression. You don't want to, like, let's say in 4 bars, go from having one instrument all of a sudden having all of these instruments playing, because you won't portray that same emotion that Hans Zimmer does, and it just won't have the same feeling. So that's not the only place I've got progression. I have got progression later on in the tracks, and especially just after this section here, it goes back down into a couple instruments, soft piano and a harp, and then builds up again with staccato strings rather than the sustained strings, and then brass comes in. Hans Zimmer doesn't always do progression from start to finish. He does add in different areas with progression. There was a track I can't remember the name of, but I'll write it in the description, that doesn't have that progression style for a long time, and then later on, about the 4-minute mark or something, he finally does a progressive sound from the sort of smaller instruments to then the bigger instruments, and it adds just so much emotion. And you can imagine that it was probably used, depending on which film it was in, to just portray so much emotion on screen. Anyway, that is depth in progression. I hope you learned something here. I felt like this was quite an easy concept to grasp, but hearing it from my track, hopefully you understand how sort of simple it is to create something so big and very Hans Zimmer-like. Anyway, I'll see you in the next video.